Picture this. Trump and Xi are sitting across from each other in Beijing, cameras rolling, the whole world watching. They shake hands, sign off on a joint statement saying the Strait of Hormuz must stay open. Xi personally promises Trump that China will not supply weapons to Iran. Trump walks out, tells reporters it was, quote, a big statement. And at that exact same moment, Iranian Revolutionary Guard forces were boarding a Chinese-operated weapons ship 38 miles off the coast of one of America's closest Gulf allies. Same day, same hour. You cannot make this up. Stay with me because what just happened in the Gulf on May 14, 2026 is not just another maritime incident. This is a provocation so precisely timed, so operationally bold, that it rewrites what we thought we understood about Iran's intentions right now. And I'm going to walk you through every layer of it, including what the U.S. military has already done and what's sitting in that theater ready to go. Everything we cover here is sourced and verified, which is exactly what Verified Bulletin is built for. Now, before anything else, hit that subscribe button. This channel exists to give you the complete picture when every other outlet is only giving you half the story. Most people watching the news right now have no idea what a floating armory actually is. So before we get into the seizure itself, you need to understand what Iran actually took. A floating armory is a specialized vessel anchored in international waters beyond any nation's 12 nautical mile territorial limit. Its entire purpose is weapons logistics. Commercial ships crossing dangerous corridors, the Gulf of Aden, the Persian Gulf, they don't want to carry weapons into port because most countries will confiscate them or arrest the crew. So maritime security firms use these floating platforms as a pickup and drop-off point. Security teams collect weapons before the danger zone, transit the high-risk passage, then return the guns to the armory on the other side. Clean, legal, practical. That system has protected global shipping since the Somali piracy explosion between 2008 and 2012. It worked for years. Until May 14, 2026, when Iran sent its Mosquito fleet to go shopping. The vessel in question was the Honduras-flagged Hui Chuan, operated by Sinoguards, a Chinese maritime security contractor. According to UKMTO, the UK Maritime Trade Operations Authority that monitors Gulf shipping, the Hui Chuan was anchored approximately 38 nautical miles northeast of Fujairah when it was boarded at 5:45 UTC. Contact with the vessel was immediately lost. AIS tracking signals went dark, and maritime consultancy Vanguard confirmed that the company's security officer reported the ship was, quote, taken by Iranian personnel. 38 miles off Fujairah. That's not some isolated stretch of open ocean. Fujairah is the UAE's primary oil export terminal, specifically designed to bypass the Strait of Hormuz entirely. It is a strategic lifeline for global energy. And the UAE is one of Washington's most trusted Gulf partners. Iran didn't just take a ship. Iran walked into the front yard of a U.S. ally and took a weapons cache while the U.S. president was sitting in Beijing. Now, here's where this stops being a maritime story and becomes something far more significant. As of May 15th, CENTCOM Commander Admiral Brad Cooper testified before the U.S. Senate Armed Services Committee. He confirmed that Operation Epic Fury has degraded Iran's defense industrial base by more than 85%. He confirmed that U.S. forces have already destroyed more than 90% of Iran's inventory of 8,000 naval mines. That's extraordinary. A stockpile that once represented Iran's most potent tool for closing the strait, effectively gutted. But Admiral Cooper also said something else. Something the headlines missed almost entirely. Iran still has a residual strike capability. The IRGC, battered, degraded, running on fumes economically, still functions as what Cooper called, quote, a major force. And here's the part that matters. When you've lost 85% of your industrial base, when your currency is in free fall, when your proxy networks have been systematically dismantled, when the ceasefire your own side agreed to is being described publicly by Trump as on, quote, massive life support, What do? You steal what you can no longer build. That's what happened on May 14th. Iran needed weapons. They knew where a ship full of them was sitting, and they took it in broad daylight during the one diplomatic moment when the entire global media apparatus was pointed at Beijing. Think about that level of calculation. Drop a comment right now. Do you think this was an intelligence operation or pure opportunism? I want to hear your thinking because this community is sharp and I read every single reply. Now, about that Beijing summit. Because this detail keeps getting glossed over and it shouldn't. President Xi Jinping personally gave Trump assurances that China would not provide military equipment to Iran. Both sides publicly affirmed the Strait of Hormuz must remain open for global energy flow. These weren't backroom whispers. These were formal summit commitments made on camera. And within hours, the IRGC Navy boarded and seized a vessel operated by a Chinese maritime security firm. Beijing's response since then? Remarkably quiet. No sharp diplomatic language, no demands for the vessel's return, no protest to Tehran. For a nation whose security contractor just got pirated in international waters by a sanctioned paramilitary force, that silence is loud. Secretary of State Marco Rubio made the American position crystal clear. Washington does not recognize Iran's claimed right to toll the strait. The U.S. will not accept Iranian mines in international waters. And then Rubio said the line that should have been the headline everywhere. Quote, "We're not asking for China's help. We don't need their help." Read that slowly. The United States just publicly told Beijing, in the politest possible diplomatic language, "Don't confuse our handshake for dependence." Here's what's happening beneath the surface. China has competing interests pulling in opposite directions right now. Roughly 40% of China's crude oil imports transit the Strait of Hormuz. A permanently closed strait damages China's economy just as it damages everyone else's. So China genuinely wants stability, eventually. But China does not want the United States to be the country that delivers that stability. A U.S. that defeats Iranian aggression, secures the world's most critical shipping lane, and rebuilds Gulf coalition alliances walks out of this conflict with enormous global credibility. And a more credible United States is a much more formidable obstacle when Beijing turns its attention to Taiwan. So, from Beijing's perspective, the optimal outcome isn't chaos forever. It's prolonged, inconclusive pressure that bleeds American resources and attention without ever letting Washington declare a clean win. A Chinese-operated floating armory conveniently seized during a U.S. China summit, giving Iran a weapons restock and Beijing complete deniability? That is almost too perfectly crafted. Almost. Now, on the Iran nuclear file, because you cannot separate the weapons seizure from the negotiations happening in parallel. As of the latest IAEA reporting, Iran holds approximately 408 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity. Weapons grade is 90%. That gap sounds significant. It isn't. The technical leap from 60 to 90% is far shorter than the leap from low enrichment to 60. The hard centrifuge work is already done. Multiple arms control researchers have estimated that if Tehran made the decision to push to weapons grade today, they could theoretically produce enough fissile material for one nuclear device in a matter of weeks. Not months, weeks. And Iran's parliament, just 2 days before the armory seizure, publicly threatened to push enrichment to 90% if the U.S. resumed strikes. On May 13, 2026, Iranian lawmakers delivered that statement while Kuwait was summoning Iran's ambassador after IRGC personnel were caught attempting an armed infiltration of Bubiyan Island. 1 day later, the Hui Chuan was gone. Trump called Iran's latest nuclear counterproposal totally unacceptable. He used the word stupid. Diplomatic niceties are clearly over. What Iran is proposing, according to reporting from Al Jazeera and Gulf News, is essentially a pause. A temporary freeze on enrichment activity with zero dismantlement of centrifuges, zero verified reduction of stockpiles, and the entire infrastructure preserved intact. A 5-year timeout that buys them everything without giving up anything. Washington looked at that offer and called it exactly what it is: a stall. Here's the hard truth about Iran's strategic position right now, and this is the part most coverage completely misses. Iran is not negotiating to reach a deal. Iran is negotiating to survive long enough that a deal becomes unnecessary. Every seized ship, every aggressive statement, every enrichment threat, none of these are random. They're moves in a single, coherent strategy. Outlast American attention. Fragment coalition unity. Keep the strait as permanent leverage. Hope that someone, somewhere, eventually offers an exit that lets Tehran keep everything it has built. But that strategy has a fatal flaw. The U.S. military in this theater right now is not the reactive, scrambling force that Iran's planners may have modeled against. What's currently positioned in the Persian Gulf represents a precisely assembled strike architecture that has already shown what it can do. CENTCOM published footage confirming strikes that, per Admiral Cooper's sworn Senate testimony, have destroyed more than 90% of Iran's 8,000 mine stockpile. 6 IRGC fast attack vessels were sunk during the opening days of Project Freedom, the operation Trump authorized to escort commercial shipping through the strait. 2 U.S.-flagged merchant vessels have already successfully transited under Navy escort. A full U.S. naval blockade of Iranian ports has been in effect since April 13th. 22 countries, including the UK, France, Germany, Japan, the UAE, and Bahrain, have signed a joint statement committing to contribute to safe passage efforts in the Strait of Hormuz. This is not a two-country standoff. This is a coalition. And the hardware backing that coalition is where things get genuinely one-sided. The A-10 Thunderbolt, already deployed to the theater, was built for exactly the kind of fight Iran's Mosquito fleet represents. Its GAU-8 Avenger rotary cannon fires 30mm rounds at nearly 4,000 rounds per minute. Against a fiberglass-hulled fast attack craft doing 50 knots across open water, a 2-second burst is not a warning, it's a kill. The AC-130J Ghost Rider, operating at night using infrared sensors that see everything, carries a 105mm howitzer on an airplane. You can't hear it, you can't see it, and by the time you know it's above you, the problem is already solved. Army AH-64 Apache helicopters carrying Hellfire missiles and forward deployed to Gulf bases give U.S. commanders a layered, multi-domain answer to every tactic in Iran's playbook. The IRGC knew all of this, which is precisely why they struck a floating armory instead of a U.S. warship. They are operating in the gray zone deliberately, bold enough to restock, not bold enough to trigger the full weight of American air power in a confined maritime theater. But that gray zone calculation can shift fast. 3 triggers exist right now that could fundamentally change the trajectory of this entire conflict within the next 30 days. Nuclear talks are either about to collapse or produce something real, and the evidence strongly favors collapse given Iran's posture. The next IRGC naval provocation is coming, and if it involves American personnel or a direct engagement with a U.S. Navy asset, the rules of engagement shift from management to kinetic response immediately. And the coalition either deepens or fractures. With 22 nations already committed, the momentum right now runs against Iran's leverage calculus. Brent crude closed at $107.77 on May 12th. The International Maritime Organization reports 20,000 seafarers remain stranded aboard 2,000 vessels in the Hormuz area. U.S. April inflation hit 3.8%, a 3-year high driven directly by energy costs from this conflict. Every single day the strait remains even partially closed, the pressure for resolution intensifies. And here is the bottom line that the mainstream coverage keeps dancing around without saying directly. Iran seized that weapons ship today because they are running low. They seized it during a U.S. China summit because they needed the cover. They seized it 38 miles off Fujairah because they knew it was lightly guarded and the global media was looking elsewhere. This was not a show of strength. This was desperation with a very good PR department. A regime that had genuine leverage would not need to steal weapons from a commercial armory in international waters. A regime that was winning this conflict would not have 85% of its defense industrial base destroyed. A regime that held the high ground would not be watching its ceasefire collapse, while its parliament threatens nuclear escalation and its currency evaporates. The Hui Chuan is gone. Whatever was on it is now inside Iranian territory. That's a real intelligence gap. That's a genuine tactical setback for maritime security operations in the Gulf. But strategically, every move Iran makes right now builds the case for exactly the outcome Tehran is trying to prevent. A more unified coalition, a more assertive U.S. military posture, a narrower diplomatic window, a harder line from Washington on the nuclear file. The next 30 days in the Strait of Hormuz will tell us more about the trajectory of this conflict than the previous 2 months combined. Watch the nuclear talks. Watch the next IRGC provocation. Watch whether that 22-nation coalition holds, because when those 3 threads pull together, the picture they form is going to be very clear. If this breakdown gave you the full picture that every other outlet left out, this is exactly what Verified Bulletin does every single day. Subscribe right now so you don't miss the next update, because this story is moving fast, and the next development could come within 48 hours. Hit the like button if this gave you something the headlines didn't, and drop your take in the comments. Was China involved in that timing? Was this a setup or pure Iranian opportunism? I want to know what you think. See you on the next one.